Hello, everybody. It's been a long time since I have uploaded any videos. Maybe at some point I will explain why that is, but I am very excited to be back with you today, and I couldn't be happier about my guest. Her name is Raine, and I am going to introduce her to you in just a moment, but we're going to do a little housekeeping first before we get started. I want to thank you guys for keeping in touch with me. Many of you have emailed and continued to send me information, make appointments, and I appreciate your continued interest. I do want to explain a little bit about my website that I had for 8 years. Many of you have inquired as to why it's no longer there. I would like to know that myself. About 8 months ago, my website just magically disappeared overnight, and I have no explanations for it. So who knows what happened? What I am doing right now is working with my sweet little daughter-in-law. She is going to be helping me rebuild my website, and I will keep you posted on how that is coming along. In the meantime, you can still reach me and make appointments at galacticstoryteller@gmail.com. So let's get started. And I want to introduce my guest today. I'm going to read her bio here straight off the page. So give me just a moment here. Her name is Raine. She is a courage advocate, life coach, mother, and silversmith with a healthy passion for truth, which is no doubt why we get along so well. As a survivor of satanic ritual abuse and mind control, Asia understands healing and integration as a powerful way to live life. She has learned that to be your own inner archaeologist is a birthright and a sacred endeavor. It is the quest for the holiness within and is worth the investment, the effort, the time, and the energy to do so. Dedicating 23 plus years to her healing journey, she has found strength through her willingness to unearth and unravel the programming and effects of trauma within her experience. She has mastered the art of looking within and teaches others to do the same. She speaks firsthand about satanic ritual abuse, ceremonial torture, human experimentation, and mental slavery. Her experience has taught her that life lived through the courageous action is one of personal responsibility and removing ourselves from the triangle of victim, villain, and rescuer. She offers individual and group mentorship, memory recovery and past life sessions, and inner childhood work, and enjoys making jewelry and teaching silversmithing in her art studio in Utah. Asia is the podcast host of Letters to the People, holds a support group for people exiting the Mormon church and satellite cult groups, and holds seminars to help educate communities about ritual abuse and mind control. I'm going to list her contact information in the show notes, but I would love to welcome my guest, Miss Raine. How are you today?
I'm great. I am so good. Thanks, Madeline. I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation with you.
Yes, I think it's important that we let the people know up front that we are going to be talking about satanic ritual abuse, mind control, especially as it pertains to the Mormon church. So if this is not something that you feel that you can handle, I'm going to ask you to just come back and visit us at another time. We are going to be going into some particular details, but if this is something that you want to learn about, you need to resolve in your life or resolve within your belief system, we are going to dig deep today. So
that sounds great.
what I would like to do, Asia, is invite you to just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, your family background, and how you came to understand that satanic ritual abuse was something that you had dealt with in your life.
Wow. So you just covered like 36 years of my life with that question. I was born into a Mormon family, generational Mormons. The grandparents. I'm the oldest daughter of two oldest children, so I was in this unique position to be able to know my grandparents when they were, in the younger version of grandparenthood, and then even some great grandparents. And I remember that my great grandfather on my dad's side actually came across the ocean to the United States, and he was from England. So there's English roots there, and on my grandmother's side of my dad, it also over in Europe and that kind of thing. But the reason I'm bringing that in is that I was able to kind of see some generational things that I've been able to kind of, connect dots with. And we can probably get into that a little bit later. But they were all Mormon. And I grew up what I felt was as a typical family, typical Mormon family. I was confirmed and baptized. I was blessed in the church. And I was also married, and we were married in the temple and had that part of my life. I had 6 children. I'm not married anymore, but during that period of my life, I was married and very, very dedicated and loyal to the church. I have brothers and a sister, and we did what I felt was pretty typical as far as, the Mormon upbringing goes. So I grew up in Utah. We did a lot of moving, but the majority of my growing up years, so I was born in Provo. We moved to Los Angeles for a period of time and then came back to Utah. And I started schooling in Utah. So kindergarten, first grade, I was in Salt Lake. And then we moved to Bountiful, and I was there for a couple of years, a couple of grades. And then we moved to Ogden, and I was there from like 4th grade to 9th grade. Then we moved to Texas, and then I graduated from high school in Wyoming. So we did some moving around. The whole time I was active in the church. My father was bishop a couple of times. He served in state callings. My mom was active. She served in some callings as well. So I guess what I'm trying to do is just build a very typical Mormon picture, very typical family that was attending church and civic activities and doing what I grew up knowing that Mormons did. So,
and this whole time, you didn't know that your upbringing was different than your classmates or other children sitting in primary. There was no indication that anything was different.
No, the thing that's important to remember as I'm starting this is I did not know consciously of my satanic ritual experiences because those memories had been repressed. And I didn't start getting those memories back until I was about 36, 37 years old. Anything that would be coming through, say, in bad dreams or triggers or anything, I had no way to really connect the dots. I had nothing that I could look at as anything other than circumstantial. So growing up the way I did and the conditioning methods that were going on in my family, because my dad was very conscious of it. My mom was also participating. And I think there was a lot of coercion there and also dissociation. So I can't really speak for my mom and what her experience was and how she was there. But I do know that with the satanic ritual, there's always there's dissociation, there's drugging, there's coercion, there's manipulation. So there's a lot of different aspects that are always involved to create the most effective and smoothest ceremony or ritual or even programming process that is possible. And they're really good at that too.
So you feel like your mom had been coerced, even though she was from a generational family as well, she was under the control of your father, which made it easier for you children to be groomed, correct?
Right.
Okay.
And
okay.
I really don't know, just for the record, I don't know what made it so she was chosen. Based on my own experience, my marriage was arranged to my ex when I got married. Our marriage was arranged, and I honestly believe that there was also a choosing and a partnering between my parents. But I don't know what the criteria was, what criteria she fit to have that family dynamic put together. One of the obvious things, if you're into this very deeply, you understand that bloodlines are important.
Yes.
So there's a I have a suspicion that the bloodline mattered on that one, and they were looking for specific bloodlines for that, for, you know, the eugenics or for personality traits or something like that. I'm really not 100% sure on that, on my mother's side of things, because so much of my experience was with my father, my father's family, and then the LDS church.
So what I have found out over the years of research is that particular bloodlines carry specific spiritual gifts and traits that they look for and breed for. Not only that, that through the generational satanic programming, the programming carries down from one generation to another. So if you've got that on both sides, now you've got children who are programmed, you know, through the DNA, but then you're also way more susceptible to the programming.
Right. Correct.
So I would imagine that went into selecting your mother and father as mates.
My parents met while they were on missions. They both went to Germany.
Okay.
And back in the day, they were both born in 1941. So when they went on missions, the way the church had it, you know, like created, is that the women went out when they were older. Anyway, so it's kind of like she had gone out and then he had gone out and they had met while they were there. But he was from Los Angeles and she was from a little tiny town in Utah. And so one of the mysteries to me is like, why would somebody from LA, you know, who was like a lifeguard on the beach and, you know, like more classically trained in a lot of things, what did he find in a farm girl from Utah? Not that that is a, you know, an unusual thing. It has really created, now that I know what I know, well, even before that, it was always something like, how did these two get together? As a kid, I was just like, because they fought a lot, you know, it was very uncomfortable. So even that kind of destabilization was the right kind of atmosphere for keeping children, you know, kind of destabilized. So that the programming would also maintain its effectiveness. So victims and survivors are consistently, like, they're constantly looking for some kind of safety. And my home, because of that, there was rarely that the safety aspect, at least for my system, I mean, not consciously, but for my system, it was not very often, you know, like there was always kind of a high alert going on in my system. Is mom in a good mood? Is she in a bad mood? Is dad going to come home and be happy? Like what, you know, and I know a lot of people can relate to that. And that's just normal human experience, but it's also normal human trauma, right? So if there is programming and training in your life, that is one of the aspects that actually helps it, so you can't access the memories because you're still on high alert for your present moment. Does that make sense?
It does. I do want to ask you, and I haven't asked you this question before, so feel free to decline to answer or not. One of the things that I have found with individuals that I've worked with is that the father in particular views and participates in some way in child pornography. Is that something that you ever uncovered in your background?
So the pornography side of it was not the most strong aspect, though it was there. There was incest. So that, I don't know if you're using pornography and incest kind of in the same basket, but there was definitely incest that happened. And the pornography side of it, there's, you know, you're going to be part of this whole thing is being taken to rituals or ceremonies or experience, you know, places where they are going to be filming. And there's going to be some, you know, like it's child pornography that is marketed and that kind of thing. The thing that's important to know about this, though, is there's a difference. There was a difference in my experience, and I tend to believe that this is more common than not. But I'm just talking about my experience right now. That the only time that my dad showed up in any of the ceremonies or any of the formal rituals was at the end to either rescue me or take me home. So he was being positioned to be an effective handler that I would trust. So to have him in ceremony in a regular time was not the way that it worked with me. I was often taken someplace and dropped off or handed over to, and then there were a number of rituals that he showed up to right at the end, just as at the last part of the terror, it's starting to come down, and he shows up and turns into kind of like takes on that savior role. If somebody else in the room hadn't been posing as the savior of the moment, but then he can, his presence made it so a lot of my system then would settle, and that would also start putting the pushing the memories back into the system as the biological system of anybody's body starts to come back from something that's so terrifying. The familiarity of having somebody that you can trust is really important and essential.
So you've got the trauma bonding element there. Now, did you suffer at any time from multiple personality or dissociative identity disorder? Okay. And for how many years do you feel like that was going on?
Until I identified the personalities and I integrated them. So that would have been, so I started my therapy when I believe I was 37 years old. And working on the multiple personalities, the parts work, that was part of the experience, my healing experience with the therapist that I was with. But I don't know that really started until I started to recognize that there was something there to work with. So I may have been easily 6 months to a year into the hypnotherapy process, into that therapy process, before I was becoming more and more aware of myself and noticing any shifts. And I need to insert this too, like I was really fluid in my switching, in my shifting, in the multiple personalities. They were not severe changes. If we were friends and, I got triggered and I switched, it would be very unusual for you to pick up on that. Really? You know what I mean? Because I was very fluid in my switching. And the way I know that is because that was a comment that my therapist made. He actually vocally started helping me when I would switch, even in session, right? He would point it out and he would ask me before he said, before he even says, oh, you switched, like he would never identify it. He would say, check in and see how you feel. Do you feel different? Like he was helping me start to track it, right?
Right.
So that I could self-regulate or actually start talking to those parts, which is a huge part of the healing process. But when we started having the conversation about the multiple personalities, he said it took me a while to actually track that and see that in, because your switching is so fluid. And then he did say something else, which I was alarmed at, but I was actually grateful. He did say, he goes, you do have multiple personality disorder. And I could actually, what is it, where they not prescribe something, but he could say that I have that disorder. Like he
diagnose
me as that. That is something that he chose not to do, and I didn't want him to do it either. One of the things that he did say is he said, if I diagnose you, that's going to follow you around for the rest of your life. And at the time, because I was so unfamiliar with what that meant to have a diagnosis. I just didn't understand. I was like, well, okay. And it was just kind of not a big deal to me. And now that I'm on this other side, that's a big deal to me. I'm really glad that I didn't have a diagnosis that got put into the system or, was like, there is a label. But I did, this is a long way to answer your question. I did have multiple personality disorder, and I have really worked through that and integrated the parts in such a thorough way that I now have, if there are triggers and I have anything come up that requires parts work, I know exactly what to do. And it's really, really, really healing and rewarding.
Well, what I'd like to do is go back in time and talk to you a little bit about how the multiple personalities even began and why. So if you can talk to us a little bit about the different ceremonies that you went through, and let's talk a little bit about what Satanism actually is, because there are varying degrees to the point where people are participating and they don't even realize it. So there are smaller degrees of the ceremonial participation to the all-out blood ritual. So where were you in this?
So I experienced the gamut. I experienced really elaborate blood rituals where there were multiple murders, there were sacrifices of humans, of infants.
Where did this take place?
That happened in a number of different places. So it usually, let me think about this. I would say the most typical place was in the lower levels under the Salt Lake Temple, but I'd also been in ceremonies in the Provo Temple, and then there were ceremonies in private properties. I attended ceremonies at the Cathedral of the Madeleine in Salt Lake City, and that's the Catholic.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah,
it's actually
it is.
The lower levels of that one are very, very dungeon-esque. It looks like a really old medieval dungeon. And
so can I dig down on this for just a moment? I would love to know, if you can, who was present in the ceremonies at the temple and then as well as the Cathedral of the Madeleine. Who was present? Because I would imagine that with that being a Catholic facility, were there Catholic individuals as well as the Mormon hierarchy, or were they separate?
No, the thing that I think is really educational here is that when you're talking about satanic ritual abuse in the manner that I experienced it, and all around, the Brotherhood is what I called it in my mind. So I just called it the Brotherhood. And I know it's because I heard that phrasing.
Yeah.
And people refer to it as the cabal or whatever they want to, but the Brotherhood, this blood cult, they're intermingling. It's kind of like, if you think, I always thought of it like as an underground river. That's what it is. And then they have these offshoots, like these wells that come to the top, and it shows up like a Catholic minister or priest, shows up like a Mormon bishop, shows up like a hospital administrator, shows up like a bus driver. So
we think they're separate.
We think they're separate, and they're living that life on the surface.
Right.
So, I mean, you and I could put on any costume we want. Like if I wanted to tell you that I was a pharmacist and I'm going to wear a pharmacist coat and I happen to know the jargon of a pharmacist, but I have nothing to do with it. Like I'm not, if you and I really didn't have a close relationship, you would know me as a pharmacist because I'm claiming that. Like, why would you question that of me?
Right.
So we have this, just as humans, we have this trust and we have this desire to know how we're relating to each other through identification. And so it might be interesting or kind of like a little strange for people to think, well, wait a minute, the Mormons and the Catholics are like in the same ceremony. And it's like, they're not Mormon or Catholic. That's Mormon or Catholic on, and that's their day job.
Right.
When the ceremonies are happening, then that's a whole different dynamic. So yeah, there's Mormons, there's Masons, there's Catholics, there's Scientologists, there's, Gnostics, there's political figures. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what's happening in the ceremony, what's the purpose of the ceremony, and who needs to be there. So not everybody's going to show up. So when you ask me about who was there, the question is really like, what was the ceremony and what was going on? Because that would actually define who would be required, requested, or needed there. Okay. So sure, yeah, I could, at the Cathedral of the Madeleine, that I was a very young, how old was I? I would say maybe I was 5 or 6. And this one is a very interesting ceremony that happened. And it was confusing for me to even get this memory. I don't fully know why, but I think people that really understand oaths, covenants, witchcraft, black magic, that kind of thing, it was a circumcision ceremony, and the circumcision was being performed on a grown man. And so he voluntarily was laying on this altar that was in the basement. And there was a lot of chanting, and there was like people in robes, and there were spells being cast. But this thing about this circumcision, the reason I know that is because my role was to carry in the tray with the surgical instruments on it. And I was given instructions, but I was also drugged. So all of the ceremonies that I was ever in, there was always an altered state. So you're going to dissociate, you're going to be drugged, you're going to be terrorized, and you're going to be following instructions because that's the way the training is, right? And so I was in a drug state. I was already dissociated. This chanting always triggers you because that means something. And there was a calling in of an energy. So when I stepped into the room, I could actually feel the density in the room. And it was very dark, like dark as in dark, not a lot of light, and dark as in heavy, demonic.
Okay.
Anyway, there was a part of me that the interesting thing about this memory, I feel like it was really important. It was one of the earlier memories that I got. I was kind of setting the stage for the next 8 years for myself, actually, in the stories that I would be recovering. But I remember going in and going closer, and I got close enough to the altar that people kind of parted, and I could see I could see this naked man on the altar, and I could hear. They usually whisper in your left ear. There's a lot of information in the dark black magic that comes in through the left, because you've got the right hand path and the left hand path, and they utilize the left. Then there's also the your brain, like right brain, left brain. So they're using and training children, because they understand the biology of how a child actually learns, or how a human like takes in information and stores it. So there's reason why they would be whispering or touching or whatever they do on whatever side of the body.
Because you come in with the left and you act on the right.
Mm-hmm. And that is going to, if you come in on the left, that's going to create that's your right side of your brain.
Right hemisphere, yeah.
Right. So it's working with the right hemisphere of the brain, and that's taking in things. And still there's other sensories that are happening. So again, like I'm saying, that I'm feeling what I'm feeling in my body because of the drugged state. I've already dissociated, so I'm already in kind of a part or a personality. And then I'm hearing this chanting, and I'm watching people swaying, and there's just, then I can sense, because of the energetic of who we are as humans, we have the spirit bodies around us, like, who we are, our spirit can sense what's there. And so the psychic abilities have also been developed. So I could just sense all of this, and I got close enough, and I understood that what I had in front of me it needed to stay clearly, because they were going to, perform this ritual. Yeah. But the way I interpreted it was, if it gets dirty, they'll stop what they're doing. And as a 5-6-year-old, I wanted it to stop. So I dropped the tray. That was my logic. And I really angered a lot of people by doing that, because I stopped the ceremony. And I got beat afterwards. Like every time I started doing something like that, and I had the personality to really create a lot of issues, but I also had the personality that I was trained really heavily to be very obedient. So when I was in the obedient side of personality, pretty freaking obedient. But I just had this wild side, this actually righteous soul is probably the best way to put it. That is a very mature soul that saw that, and so it would come through as much as it possibly could. And so in this case, I dropped the tray and I ruined the ceremony. And I'm not sure what happened with the ceremony after that, because I got taken out and I got, I got beat because of it. And there were some other conditionings and things that happened to me. in a different room. But I remember, because that was also very terrifying. There was bloodletting. There was all kinds of things that were happening there anyway. That was one of the ceremonies that my dad showed up, and I was just so happy he was there. Like, just get me out of here. And I remember, because they've got gargoyles around the top of that building, I remember looking at the gargoyles too and knowing there was an association there, but just wanting to bury my head in his shoulder and just like, get me out of here. So not one part of me was thinking, how did you know to find me here? And you know what I mean? Like, you just are not in the logical brain. You just are like, I'm so glad my dad's here and let's go home. And I wanted to just get away. I want it all over with. And that was at night. So I think I fell asleep on the ride home for that one. But usually what they do afterwards too is you will be given something to create the switch, and it's usually sugar. So you're usually given like candy to induce it, you know, as a drug ingestion or a drink or whatever. And then sugar, sometimes the candy will have like another drug to put you to sleep. So you wake up out of this bad dream, or you just wake up out of it later. But the sugar actually works. It does chemical, you know, like it has chemical reactions in your brain.
Right.
So the sensory is actually going to be a more of a dominant sensory. And what you don't want to have, I don't want to remember, is very easily pushed to the back. The drugging is, I'm coming out of the drug state. I'm coming out of my dissociation. So everything starts combining really easily and quickly to make it so the memory will be repressed and not accessed.
I see.
By me anyway. And while I was taking all of that in, a different part of your brain is actually active. So there's also the whole brain functioning that is also present. So I'm explaining this so people can understand that I did not have any memories until I actively went in and started searching for them. Basically, I just wanted to figure out why I was depressed, went to find a therapist. That's a whole story right there. But in the therapy, using hypnotherapy, I went and found, I was looking for the root of why I was depressed, and it just dropped me into this whole satanic ritual blood cult. And I started healing because I was getting the memories out. I was finally being able to express them.
So what can you tell us about any ceremonies that took place in an LDS temple? You mentioned Salt Lake City Temple. I believe you mentioned Provo. Can you tell us anything about ceremonies there and who may have been present and what you were doing? What were these ceremonies about?
The ceremonies are always, there's a number of different kinds of ceremonies. And so every ceremony that I remembered, I may have attended 5, 6, 12 of the same kind, but all I really, you know, like I got the memory that was going to be able to release that kind of a memory. But the point is, they all seem to be a little bit different. So there were ceremonies that, the elaborate ones, where there were multiple murders. This would be during a particular holiday. And I'm trying to think of this one.
Who was murdered? Like a baby, a child, an adult, a virgin? What was happening?
All of it. In this particular memory, this was a very terrifying memory for me. I mean, they are terrifying. But I came in from an outside door. So at the Salt Lake Temple, they used to have like a guard shack. And it was on the east side of the temple. And I don't think we went in through the guard shack. I think there was like an exterior or another doorway that what you were able to access in the temple. But we actually went down into the temple, past a bunch of kind of mechanical equipment. So there were pipes and things like that. And we went past some mechanical equipment. And in this pipes, I remember there was like we were walking to this one spot, and we had to stop. And there was the men were using they were using flashlights, and we stopped at this one part, and they flipped the light on and flipped it off, And then it was like a three-way switch. And so then a light at the other end of this long kind of corridor hallway flipped on and off. So they were actually just doing some signaling. And while we had that pause, I could hear like screaming, like just I could hear things in the distance. I could hear that we were getting closer to, which started my dissociation again, like, oh, here we go. Like you just know when you're headed to these things. And I also remember as we walked down and got closer to the one door, there was blood coming out underneath the door a little bit. And there was a drain on the one side of the door. And so when we signaled that we were there and we opened the door, it was kind of like the door opened and we stepped in, and it was this really kind of it was a very, very large room.
Mm-hmm.
And there was I remember looking over to where I saw the blood, and there was a young woman who was, she was dead. She was just bleeding. There was just a bunch of blood. But then I also noticed that there were other bodies. And I would say, I mean, if you're going to talk about, by the time I was there, there was probably like 5 or 6 bodies already mounded in this corner that had just been kind of discarded right there. And I walked in, and the set, like it was about pulling in one of the not just Satan, but one of his higher generals, so that it would be something like Baal or I don't know. There wasn't Ahriman. Yeah, one of these. It was to call in one of these higher demons, and then Satan himself, but that hadn't got to that part of the ceremony at that point. And at that place, there were a number of people, men. There were men, young men, and average. There wasn't really anybody that was old. I can't say that there was. I didn't see like 60 and older. So
anybody that you recognize or that can share, you can share with us.
Yeah, sure. As far as the one that was in charge, it was Boyd K. Packer, and he was actually dressed as a goat. And if you know much about him or you hear much about him, he did favor wearing a goat costume, and he had like, horns that were here, just the little goat horns that were here on his forehead, and goat skin. And there were like, he even had like down on his legs, it looked as if there could have been hooves. So he was on kind of an altar or a kind of a throne.
Okay.
But everything that was going on was terrifying, because people were kneeling, and they were all naked, and they were kneeling down, and they were in like there were 3 rows of them, and there was probably about I would say maybe 4 in each row. And none of the victims knew if they were going to be called up and killed, or if they were going to get passed by. So there was a lot of terror going on what that was. But they'd already killed, like I said, like 5 or 6 people already. And it was just a bloodbath. The whole thing was just the way the ceremony was going was a picking and choosing, and who they were calling up, and what Packer was wanting to have, and what was talking to him. And at one point, I was brought up to the front where there was an altar, and they were wanting to, well, before they got to the sacrifice, the setup was for me to choose who was going to be sacrificed. And so they will do that to kids. Like, they put you in these double binds of having to choose. And so you're in this drug state, but you're also in terror. And then they pose questions like, do you trust me? And remember how they will have had experience, like they will have just performed something where the only way to trust them is like you got saved from being killed by somebody else or something else just moments before. And so your trust has to go to the, you naturally are like in this thing where you're like, no, I don't trust you, but
You're in
I kind of have
survival.
to trust you. Oh yeah, it's just
Yeah.
there's no way to get out of this, but there's also no logical thinking that's happening. But in this particular situation, I do remember that. Let me think, because there was this. I just remember being put in a situation where I had to choose, and they'd already chosen this little boy to sacrifice, and they didn't present it on, will he or won't he? It's more like, is he going to die with a lot of pain or not, kind of idea. So
Did you know who this little boy was?
I didn't know. I don't know. Personally, I don't know anybody except for, like, there would be a handler that I knew, because usually in this kind of ceremony, especially with this many people, there would have been other general authorities that were there, as well as the leader that was there. And then in this ceremony, this child was sacrificed to Satan. And in this case, before they sacrificed this little boy, Packer was actually acting like he was like, I can hear Lord Lucifer coming. I can hear him. And so he's going through this scenario where he's acting as if he knows what is being called for. And that's kind
Like
of
a
how
channel.
this child, as a channel.
That is okay.
So he was in this case, I'm not going to say that he wasn't actually channeling that, but I also know that there was, the choice is already there. So the words are, I'm channeling, where in reality, he may not have been channeling even. Not to say that he wasn't, being possessed, like, to even have that, there's this really, really, really dark aspect of the people that are there anyway, that, you're going to have something channeling through you, but you become so enmeshed with that darkness that you're acting from your own bloodlust. And so he was saying that he could hear Lucifer coming, that he could actually, that he knew who was to be the sacrifice. And then the question, to me was, with pain or without pain, or, do we slit his throat or we stab his heart, kind of idea. Like, there's just, it's a question I don't know how to answer, and I wouldn't. And so they chose for me, kind of idea, but I had to be the one to sacrifice this child. So they brought me up, and he's laying on the altar, and it's this, kind of stone altar. And then I have got the dagger in my hands, but they have their hands around my hands. Mm-hmm. And then, up and plunge, and the blood is spilled, and it's horrible. It's actually, I hated that one because I could actually feel the way the dagger was going into his body, and you can just feel what's happening, through the body. And that was super disturbing to me, for like the way I kind of kept that one frozen in time, was that not only was I a bad person, because after that was done and after he died, I had Packer whispering into my ear, look what you did this. So there's nothing for me to say that I didn't. So this kind of conditioning is really typical. I'm not able to really sense anything outside of myself. Like, what are you talking about? This whole setup is you. Like, that is not the way this looks. And in the meantime, there are demons that are showing up. People are being possessed, and a satanic or a demonic figure does come, because this blood is being spilled, and there are pacts being made. There's sacrifices and agreements that are being made with this. So this was a big ceremony because there was so much blood, and there was a lot of different age groups, and things like this would be leading up to. This was probably an October ceremony, based on, it would have been late September, because usually, so I do know that the 23rd and 24th of every single month are dates that are important to these groups, to the groups that are in this blood sacrifice realm. So that's on a monthly basis. The full moon, the new moon, that's going to factor in. But sacrifice season, as I coin it, is like October to January 1st. So there's all kinds of ceremonies that are going on. I mean, you've got, I think about it, like there's obvious ones.
Do you think there's a relationship with what you experienced, the Satanism, and then the doctrine of the Mormon Church with the blood atonement, the
For
purpose
sure.
of the blood atonement? Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah. So when you have in the Mormon Church or in the Catholic Church, both for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Any ceremonies, any ordinances, anything that you're going to be doing that that you're taught has got a positive side to it, has got its black magic or it's got its dark side. So being baptized in water, I was baptized in blood before I was baptized in water. Before, because the blood, I was told that this was the original baptism, and the stain of the blood could never be washed away. So there's really nothing I can do. I've been baptized to Satan. I've been baptized to them. I'm one of them. And there's a lot of blood for
now,
those.
we're going to talk about your different ceremonies in another podcast. We're going to go over the difference between the religious ordinances done through the Mormon Church versus the satanic ceremonies that you had. So whatever you want to share with us now is great, but just for the audience's sake, we're going to go into greater detail on those comparisons at another time. But share
so
with
you were asking, you were asking about the blood atonement. And the blood atonement, I was just, it's so interesting you asked me this question, because I've been reviewing, I was just reading one of the ceremonies, and in this, they can take the blood atonement and they will throw different spins on it. And it just depends on what they're trying to really drive in. In this case, they were trying to impress upon me that I shouldn't pray to God. I shouldn't pray to Jesus and call him in. In this particular situation, I was in a terrifying situation, and they were doing some painful things to me. And there was this man that walked in and claimed to be Jesus. He was dressed up like you would see a Jesus dressed up. So longer hair, and it would be and
you're a drugged small child.
I'm drugged. I'm a small child. Yeah.
Okay.
And he's in this white robe. So just all of this, it would be a typical kind of way you could envision Jesus. And he walked over to me, and I'm laying on a table, bed, whatever. I'm laying on this table and I'm strapped down, and he goes over to my feet and he looks at me, and he has this straight look on his face. And then he looks down at my feet, so I can't see his face. And when he looks back, he has this terrifying look on his face, but he's got these really sharp teeth, like werewolf kind of teeth,
Oh, wow.
And it was terrifying. And in addition to that, he started to get kind of this crazy look in his eye, and just, just really kind of working this whole I'm evil kind of thing. And he starts really yelling at me, and he's like, I died for you. I gave my blood for you, and you just don't do anything for me. And there was a knife kind of on the table. And so theatrically, he had these little tubes like strapped to his wrists, or these little capsules or whatever. And he basically said, and they weren't little, it was big. He was telling me how he had sacrificed himself and how he had bled for me, and his blood spilled on the earth, and he took that knife and he sliced those little capsules, right? So it looked like he slit his wrist, right? Now there's blood coming off his hands and down his arms, and everything is just, it's starting to get, it just suddenly got really bloody. And he was like, see, you know, like, and he's like, this blood is everywhere. And he's like, see, I'm bleeding for you now. And what are you doing for me now? And this whole, it was just this massive guilt trip about what I'm not doing. And he went on and on about how he not only sacrificed himself for me, but now he would call on his angels to how did he put it? I can't remember. It was like he basically to haunt me. And he called on these angels. And so I'm laying on a table and I can't see. I can't, so I'm like, I've got this, you know, you can't move your head. And so they start putting like these, they put a couple of real snakes up on the table and then some fake ones so that I could kind of out of the corners of my eyes or whatever, I could see snakes, right? And he was saying that these were his angels and they were going to torment me. So they're using kind of Bible language there, you know, man will be tormented kind of idea. So they were going to torment me. And then he picked up one of the snakes and he says, since you haven't used my blood or you haven't, I've bled for you and you haven't appreciated, you know, my sacrifice for you, then I'm going to take your blood and I'm going to stay in you. And so now I had kind of a sheet over me. So he went down to where my feet were and he lifted up the sheet and he put the snake underneath. And then what they do is right in there also, I can't see, but he had like a rod. And so they inserted it in my vagina, right? So he pushed that up in my vagina, but now, you know, I'm thinking there's a snake inside of me. And he says, I'm going to leave it in. I'm going to leave my angels in there and they're going to take your blood. I'm going to consume your blood because you haven't been appreciative of my blood. Like it doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense, but that's exactly what's going on. And so I'm in a place of, I don't even know what to do about this. I can feel something very invasive and violating happening. I'm terrified. There's blood everywhere. And in this particular memory, it was Boyd K. Packer again. He walks into the room and he says, what's going on here? And so he takes the stand of the rescuer or the savior, and he looks at Jesus and Jesus says to Packer, it's like, she doesn't, you know, she isn't taking my sacrifice. She's not taking on, you know, I took on her sins and she's, anyway, whatever he said about me. And so Packer points at him. I can't remember, let's see. I can't remember if he raised his arm to the square and it would have been opposite. But anyway, he said, in the name and the power of Satan himself, I command you to leave. So now he's telling Jesus to leave in the name of Satan, right? And
Satan has power over Jesus. That's what they're demonstrating to you.
Right. And the reason I'm putting these words here is so that you can understand that the setup is, it may just be in a small room, but there's still a setup. And it's still demonstrating that Jesus is weak. He's actually, in this case, a scary individual, like werewolf teeth and, you know, all of this stuff. Anyway, so he gets banished, like he gets overpowered by Satan's power and somehow disappears. I think he kind of shrinks, like, you know, like the Wicked Witch of the West does. I think he shrinks. He's out of my viewpoint anymore. And then Packer goes to my feet and says, what's going on in here? And, you know, knows that there's like, you know, supposedly this snake that's in there because Jesus told him he's going to be feeding off of my blood and that kind of thing. And so he removes that rod and then takes the snake out from under the table. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, oh, I got the snake now. And he looks at me, he goes, what did you do? And I'm like, I don't know. He goes, well, you called him in. Like, so now the reason Jesus showed up was my fault, right?
Right.
And I'm not recalling well. Again, I'm in a drug state, right? And he said, did you pray? And I'm trying to think, like, did I pray? Like, it was just this really, like, he says, well, you must have done something because he wasn't invited in here. Did you call out his name? Did you ask for Jesus to help you? Like, he's giving me all of these words that perhaps I may say at some point in my life. Jesus, please help me, whatever, that kind of thing. And I was just like, maybe, like, it just wasn't one of those things where I was even focusing in on that. And the lesson was, you can't even pray to Jesus, because when you call him in, this is what happens, and we have to save you from this. So that's kind of a superficial thing. And then if you want to take the blood atonement, the atonement is definitely going to be, there's a ceremony around Easter time that I remember where they actually did a mock crucifixion, where they did put a man on a cross and said that it was Jesus. And
Who's
and
they?
this would be, well, gosh, the Brotherhood. So this is going to be, in a lot of these cases, it's going to be high-ranking church officials, high-ranking, maybe government officials, or people in the community. It depends on who needs to be there, and then whose children need to be there to see it, what children they need there so that they can actually perform these ceremonies in front of multiple children, because it's conditioning all of us, right? So a lot of times, basically, Jesus is on the cross, and he's there because Lucifer allowed it. I was told that Jesus was allowed to come back to earth because Lucifer let him. Like, he'd been killed, he was done. I've seen so many mock battles between Lucifer and Jesus, where Jesus is either outright killed because they have somebody dressed up as him that's expendable, or they have a mock fight where he's killed or subdued by Lucifer. And anything that is allowed to happen is because Lucifer has allowed it to happen. And so Jesus died because Lucifer arranged it. He suffered because Lucifer arranged it. He died, and then Lucifer let him come back 3 days later because he's the god of this world, kind of idea. So the whole thing is always to put a juxtaposition of the weakness of Jesus against the strength of Lucifer. And then on the atonement, you're going to, like, then if you're going to really have a ceremony where a child or a baby is sacrificed, then you're going to drink the blood and you're going to eat the flesh. And that will happen with a child, or if they want to impress upon you that Jesus doesn't have like any kind of power, then, like the guy that they actually did crucify, then they actually brought him off the cross and then they cut into him. And
so you named Boyd K. Packer. Have you ever seen any of the prophets, or you named apostles? Who else has been there and participated in these rituals?
Like, when I was going through it, of the 15 that were of the first presidency and the 12 apostles, I had personal experience with 10 of them, and that was back in the 70s and early 80s. So if you want to go back and look at the chart and the faces, right, I could name off those men and say who it was I've had personal experience with. Right. The first men that I ever saw in a ceremony, when I was first going through my memory recovery, and I was now ready to introduce myself to, hey, it's not just your family that you've been noticing and seeing for the last 2 years. Now it's time to start showing you church stuff. That was Thomas Monson and Boyd K. Packer and oh my gosh, Gordon Hinckley. So those were kind of the top 3 guys during the time that I was there. The thing that was so sadistic about Boyd K. Packer, to me, he was the Antichrist. He really, really, really was sadistic. And he was also in charge of all of the CES, like the church education system. So all of the things that were written and approved by him were also put through, were designed to program and condition everybody, and reinforce conditioning and programming of victims. So the teachings are also designed in a way to mind control the people that were actually in the system, in the religion, reading the books, that kind of thing.
What about their wives? Because I have a girlfriend of mine who just cannot imagine President Hinckley's wife knowing what he was doing. And I'm like, she couldn't not know. So tell me about their wives.
Yeah, so I would say my opinion about her specifically, I never saw her. I do know that she was I would put her in the same classification as perhaps my mom.
Okay.
She was controlled and she knew that there was a lot going on with her husband. There are a lot of people, like I think there's even a video going around about Gordon Hinckley right now that talked about him and a lot of the orgy parties that were going on up in the avenues.
I'd like to see that one.
Yeah, I'll send you the link. I actually have access to that, but that I don't know if you can access it fully yet. But anyway, there was some research and some eyewitnesses that were coming out saying, yeah, Gordon Hinckley's a part of this, and there was like if I remember right, there was a car dealership that they would meet in the top of, and then there were houses that they own up in the avenues that have tunnel systems. The tunnel system is really important. That's key in all of this. So the tunnels that would go from, if you think about, and if you got an aerial view of Salt Lake City and you looked at South Temple, I find it really, really fascinating that you could go from Temple Square, and if you went east towards the University of Utah on South Temple, right?
Okay.
You go from the temple to the to the Hotel Utah, to the Beehive House, to a number of different apartments. There was a mortuary on one side, and then you hit the Protestant church, the Cathedral of the Madeleine, then the Masonic Temple, Scientology, and if you went up a little further, there was a hospital. And if you went up a little further, then now you're up in the avenues, and then you eventually reach the University of Utah, and all of which was accessed by one tunnel.
So you've been down there?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and if you want to, they're doing this really extensive, what do they call it? Where they're not refurbishing, but they're doing a reconstruction on a lot of the original temples. So the St. George, the Salt Lake, the Logan, Washington, D.C. There's, let's see, what are they? Provo, and they built a new Provo temple. But these older temples, I know that there were a lot of people that when you get into your 50s, you start remembering. So there's a lot of people that are, I think personally, getting their memories back. And there's a lot of evidence. Like people are starting to report this. I know that the reports are getting, because of who they're reporting to, the church is starting to gather data, or had been gathering data, in my opinion. So now they're going to be doing this big, revamping, and we're going to work on these temples and, retrofit them or whatever it is. But if you went to downtown Salt Lake when they were really working on the Salt Lake Temple, the excavation process of what they were trying to do is massive. It's not just below the temple. It's massive. This hole that was there, and I went and looked at it. I looked at what was there. I could see where the locations of some of these ceremony rooms would have been based on, I don't know, I had a really good sense of direction underground. And so I could tell you, I mean, I've even drawn little maps, here's the temple, and we went down here, and this ceremony room is here, and down under that ceremony room was a big amphitheater, and that's where they did even more sacrifice. And then there's little medical rooms. And then if you go down this tunnel, that's, like starting to lead you towards the church office buildings, then you're going to have little offshoots where they have like mini ceremony rooms, just the one-on-ones. And then there's others, very sacred ceremony rooms, sacred to them. And then there's other connectors to South Temple, which you could actually drive trucks through. Like it's a big tunnel,
Wow.
So golf carts, you can drive golf carts through these always, you know, it's really interesting how well maintained these tunnels are.
How old were you, or about what period in your life did you realize, oh my gosh, this has been going on in my life and the church is involved? What did that do to you?
Oh, it was horrible. That was like a very real cognitive dissonance like
Yeah.
period of time. I would say I was probably 38, 39
Mhm.
when those, maybe around, yeah, when I actually started getting all of that. Like, and when it first started, I was thinking, well, maybe it's a little symbolic. Maybe I'm trying to show myself that, you know, really powerful men can be bad sometimes. And maybe I know they dress up like Santa Claus, so maybe they're just pretending to be these people. Like, I wasn't like on board right away. Like, I couldn't do it. Like, I couldn't figure that out, even though the memories were being very consistent. Here's this person, here's this person. And yet, because I had had time prior where I was recovering memories exclusively about my family, and I started to get better, I could feel myself getting better. I had some what I would call personality disorders were starting to disappear. I was feeling more calm. Like, I was having very real experiences of healing.
So those memories were helping you get emotionally and mentally better rather than more depressed.
100%.
Okay.
That is what I will make sure I tell everybody over and over and over. Getting the memories was the way I healed.
Mhm.
And so this prevailing thought that comes from compassion and also comes from programming, like this, you know, like keeping people like not remembering of, well, we don't really want to traumatize you again. We don't really want you to get over traumatized. Let's see how you can cope. That still keeps you in your toxicity. It keeps you in your illness. It keeps your body still in its, I don't know why I have this, you know, this illness or this reaction or whatever. So I had personally, one of the things that was most terrifying to me is I had raging fits. Like, I would rage. And I don't know how to describe to anybody what it feels like to, when that rage trigger kicks on, I would feel it start at my feet and I could feel it rolling up my legs. So it's almost like I knew it was going to happen and I knew I couldn't do anything about it. But the rolling was so fast, I didn't have time to like take myself out of the room or anything. It was just going to happen.
Whoosh, it's there.
It's all there.
Okay.
And then part of that was a dissociative part where I felt like I stepped outside of myself and I watched it. I was watching it happen. And it was just absolutely terrifying to me because I could feel this rage coming up and I had no, I mean, I think we're amazing as humans that we can experience the spectrum of emotion that we can.
Mhm.
And some of that emotion is so huge. And I think this is what keeps a lot of people from really wanting to get their memories or wanting to know, like get into really what their shadow work is, because they're like, I'm terrified. Something scary is there. And my answer is, yeah, absolutely. There is something that is terrifying to you that you have purposely put there because that's the way the brain function works.
Right.
But it's not bigger than you. And it feels bigger than you because it does have that emotional capacity to feel super out of control. But to get to where you are actually getting the memories and accessing the origination points of why that rage is there, for me, it dissipates it. And I know this because I tell this story where I was doing my therapy and my oldest son, I don't know how many years into therapy I'd been, but I remember he came to me one day, he goes, and he was just kind of joking about it. He says, wow, Mom, you haven't gotten mad at us in a while now. And I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't. And then I got scared, kind of like, oh shoot, maybe, okay, I know it's there, but I know I'm doing good. I hope it doesn't happen. Like, it's almost like, is it really gone? Is this really like done?
Yeah.
And so I started watching myself like, okay, when is this going to happen? And honestly, I have never raged.
Yeah.
rage is not a part of my experience, and it's, gosh, that's been since the early 2000s. I have not had an episode of raging since I was able to get the memories and release whatever was holding the rage there.
Yeah.
Fascinating and super healing. So yeah.
Did you have to do any sort of, and for a lack of better word, exorcism, or to use a Lori Daybell word, casting? Did you have to do any of that type of negative energy or entity cleansing in order for you to allow the healing to begin? No,
no,
and
because
the reason,
go ahead.
the reason why I say that is because there is a particular individual who runs seminars, and she's on the internet. She happens to be LDS, even though she won't say that when she's in her interviews. And she has made the definitive statement that every single person who's been through this type of abuse, they have demonic attachments holding in their programming. What do you think about that?
So I'm going to agree with her on that.
Okay.
I'm going to make a delineation here.
Okay.
My healing process, it's been very complete. The way I went about it, by getting memories, I did witness demons. I did witness parts, my own parts. I did witness times, places, and all of these things. I was being really thorough, and anybody that does it through hypnotherapy in the way I did, you're going to get, if you go after the details and go after the programming words, you're going to get them.
Okay.
So what that does is it allows your body to release that energy. It allows you to actually witness and yourself again and see that truth and hear that truth. And then also, it helps you see that this is a multidimensional issue. It's not just we're play acting and trying to scare you. It is very real about what the dark black magic blood cult does utilize is the spirit world. And Mormons particularly aren't really educated in how or what the spirit world is about, other than it's kind of nebulous and you hope you get there someday. Right. So we don't necessarily have the ability to, like, we believe in angels, but if I walked in when I was a Mormon and I went to testimony meeting and saying, I saw an angel the other night, they would, nobody would believe me. Like, that kind of normalcy isn't there.
Unless you were in the temple.
Unless I was in the temple, then I could see an angel and that would be okay. But that's only, like, it's very compartmentalized. So that's a good point too. So although it's there, it's not something you everyday access. And I do have people asking me, it's like, how in the world could this be going on in the basement of the temple when there's angels in the top of the temple? And my answer to that is, you basically take with you your intentions into the temple. So if you're coming into the temple with a sacred intention, that sacred intention is you and God. Like, you're carrying that with you anyway. But here's the other thing is, that sacred intention in your life force energy that is enhanced because of your that energy that is light and bright and good, the way the temples and the places there are built, it is actually harnessing your energy and they're feeding off of it. So they're okay with everybody going in and thinking they're getting all, everything's great, because it's generating energy that they're using. So it's not just, let's sacrifice a child and get the energy off of that and, drink its blood and get the adrenochrome so we can have this, whatever it is they, are getting from that benefit. But they're also feeding off the energy of good people. So it's something that is like a dual form. So, I mean, to answer your question, one thing that I do know is that there is like the church has its own overmind that's maybe, like you could call it Satan, you could call it, an overmind, you could call it whatever you want to call it, but there is a in common agreement and energy that is demonic, that is satanic, that covers the church.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are, my opinion is when you're baptized and confirmed,
Mm-hmm.
that attachment, everybody gets an attachment from that. Because, and I'm going to go to the confirmation. So you're going to be baptized and the words are said there, but the real sealing the deal is when you have the hands put on your head and they say, and I say unto you, receive the Holy Ghost, right? At that moment, you are assigned an entity whose job it is to keep you loyal to the church, because its only job is of a loyalty to the church. And it's an entity, right? It is an energy to the church that is there, that is assigned to you. Its only job is to do that. And because we are in a world where free will and choice is what it's all about, when they word it as I say unto you, receive the Holy Ghost, and you do not push that away or refuse that, your consent, whether you say yes or not say yes, whether you're silent or not, your consent allows that entity to be attached to you. So I believe, and I agree with her, that every person that is a member of the church that has been baptized has a number and has an entity. And if you want to separate yourself from all of that, that overmind is so big, that Luciferian, that Lucifer satanic church has made it a requirement to release that entity. You have to legally remove your name from the church. You can't just stop going. It's still going to be feeding off of you. You are still going to be giving your life force energy. It's like they plugged in, there's a open port there because they have your number, they have your name, and they have your agreement that you have received it into your life, right? So the only way that it has said that it would even recognize that you no longer want to be a member is by you formally going and asking, or like filing, that you want your name removed from the records of the church, and you have to get it notarized, and you have to do it legally, and then you have to send it in before you can actually release yourself from all of that.
Yes, two things for the viewers. First of all, I have an older video on the baptism and confirmation process, which is an assigning of the demon to the individual. So if you want to learn more about that, I would suggest you go look up that old video. Also, there is a video on how to formally, legally, and properly leave the LDS church. So if you need instructions on that, you can just find that video and go through the proper channels. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit of a trick, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
The other thing that she mentions are the 4 pillars of mind control. And my belief is that there are 5. So if you could give us your take on the 5 pillars and who they are, that would be great. And then we could probably wrap it up on that, because I could sit and talk to you for another couple of hours, but I want to be respectful of your time. And we are going to be going over a number of these issues in more detail. So let's end with the 5 pillars and what the purpose of the Mormon Church is.
Okay, so the 5 major departments, there's 5 pillars that are branches of the satanic organization. Is the Freemasons, the Catholics, the Cabal, the Satanists, and the Mormons. Okay. And each of those 5 pillars has a particular role that keeps the whole system running. And the other thing about that is each pillar is run by a group, like, you would say the presidency. And then the presidency reports to a mother of darkness above that. So there are mothers of darkness, grand high priests and high priestesses, and there's territories, and it gets broken down in a number of different ways. But the thing that the Mormons are in charge of is the finances, go figure, and also the human aspect. So the human management is going to come in the form of mind control. So mind control experiments, which is what Mormons really are, whether they want to believe it or not. It's one of the reasons why the letter agencies recruit from the Mormons so much, because they're already very much in the obedience programming. They've already turned over their own free will in a lot of ways. They have entities attached to them because they're members. You know, there's already some setups that are there. So human management comes in the form of societal obedience. It also comes in the form of breeder programs. So and this is going to where the polygamous church actually is connected to the polygamous church, because so many of the polygamists have unregistered births. There's a lot of children that are provided to sacrificial ceremonies from that group. And there are also women that are kept, that really, they are producing babies specifically for the church. And then they have the LDS social services. So a lot of the adoptions that are happening, these children are going to get sold to different situations, may or may not live through them. It just depends. So the Mormon Church is in charge of the financials. We know that it's over $100 billion that they're managing. I personally believe they're money laundering for the entire system. So they've been kind of the little sweetheart that nobody really looks at, because, you know, what's a Mormon? A lot of people just don't even know what an LDS member or Mormon is. So it's already got this built-in secrecy, and then the human management. And so then the Catholic Church is going to be, you know, connected to the Jesuits and the Pope, and they've got their own thing. So do the Freemasons. And so it kind of like branches out from there. The military is part of it as well. So it's a really big overarching brotherhood that's running everything. So anyway, does that kind of hit that?
It's huge. You know what? We've named some tentacles here. We're going to explore those a little later in more detail. But what I would like for you to do, if you don't mind, is just end on a healing note, because we've laid down a lot of heavy information. Some might be difficult for others to wrap their minds around. So if you can end with a message of hope, and then also give your contact information, I'll include that in the description notes, but I'd love for them to hear from you. Just some words of encouragement.
So the thing that I love to tell people is that as big as this is as big as we are. Like, we have the capability to actually move through this. God sees us as capable, which is really, really empowering to me. And then the other thing is, like, you can do simple things to empower yourself. So if any of this has triggered you, if any of this is like, oh my gosh, I wonder if I have this, and you start to feel yourself maybe spinning off into like overwhelm or depression or whatever, there are some things that you can do just even personally that can help. So like, you can even cross your arms right here and just do some tapping like this, just because it's crossing, you know, anything that you can do to get your brain crossing, like as far as you can get your, you know, getting your arms working with different hemispheres of your brain. And one really effective method is called eye patching. And so if you are the kind of person who does kind of find yourself getting anxious a lot, you can go to the drugstore and you can buy like an eye patch. Okay. And whenever anything starts to come up that you're really, really anxious about, then it's like one side of your brain is getting more hyperactive than the other side of your brain. And so if you cover the eye, you cover your eye, and if you feel yourself start to kind of settle down, that's the eye that needs to stay covered. That's the one that, you know, the side of your brain that's really getting hyperactive. And so you just put the eye patch on and then leave it on there for about 10 minutes. And that will allow the other side of the brain to kind of like now kind of take over, because it needs to take in the information. So that's something that you can do just to even help yourself on a healing note, as far as in an anxiety kind of moment. And breathing, man, if you can just breathe in 5, hold it for 5, and breathe out 5, that's a whole system reset. And as we move more into spring and into summer, really walking barefoot, grounding is really going to be a helpful thing. But I know that educating ourselves is the biggest thing we can do here. Like, don't be afraid to look into the face of this. We really, really need to have the courage to look at this. And then really, you're going to feel like you're looking at the face of your enemy or of evil or whatever you want to frame it as. And you need to. Like, this isn't all just love and light and we're just going to pray everybody happy. Although that's a positive thing, you still need to know what you're facing and what it is you're praying for, right? So those are a couple of ideas that I have. If people want to listen to my podcast is called Letters to the People. And it's a platform for victims to share their stories. And I'm going to be sharing more and more details of my story on that podcast. And so that's letterstothepeople.com. And then it's also on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find me on Instagram. Asia Raine is what I go by. So it's iam.asia.raine is my personal side. And you can find me at Letters to the People. If you like jewelry, I make jewelry, and you can find me at, Asia Raine Designs if you want to look for that too. And then I do have a Facebook page. So that's kind of where I advertise I do a once a month support group for people that are exiting high demand religions, the Mormon church and cults. And I've actually helped people exit a few cults too. It's so fascinating the way this works. And I do have a YouTube channel, and that's not been super active, but I'm going to start putting more there so people have more access to what's there. So yeah, that's what I've got so far. Yeah.
Well, I am so grateful for you. I'm grateful for your courage and for your spirit. I just adore you. And so I really am so grateful that you've decided to do these next few podcasts with me so that we can hopefully help others see the light, realize what's going on, and then ultimately be able to find healing in their own worlds, because that is what I'm passionate about, as well as you.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's been really, really enjoyable. Thank you so much for having me on.
Sure.
I'll talk to you next time.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Again, you can reach me at galacticstoryteller.com. Well, oh, I'm sorry, that is no longer true. galacticstoryteller@gmail.com. So I will get back to you on the website. You guys have a fantastic day. Be sure and press the like button and send this to your friends and family, and we will catch you on the next show.